name is Orla Doyle and I'm an Associate Professor in the UC School of Economics, and I'm going to be chairing this session and also giving the first presentation today. I'm very pleased to be joined by three excellent speakers today. First off, we have Noel Kelly, who is the Director of Educational Welfare Services in Tusla. Then we'll have Margaret Hughes, who's the Principal of Orla Junior School in Darndale in Dublin. And then we'll have Aoife Breen, who's the Homeschool Liaison Coordinator, also in OLI. And I should say that Noel is the chair of the OLI board, and that I've been working in Darndale for a number of years as well. So the purpose of this overall conference is really to consider the likely implications and challenges which COVID-19 will have on our society in the future, and then to discuss how social scientists working with both policymakers and practitioners can contribute to finding a solution to these challenges. So I'm just going to start with some housekeeping. So this is the first time that we're using this technology to run a conference, so please bear with us if there are any technical difficulties, as there may be some. Note that each of these sessions today are being recorded and they will be made available after the conference on publicpolicy.ie. Each of our speakers will have a maximum of 15 minutes to talk, and then we're going to have a 20-minute Q&A session at the end. And everyone in the audience is welcome to pose questions during the talks using the chat function, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. Please direct all your questions to me as the chair, and I'll read out each question during the Q&A session at the end. And in your question, please say to whom your question is being directed to. And if you like, you can include your own name and what organization you're from as well. So I think with that, we're ready to get started. Hopefully everyone is online now. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. Okay, hopefully, let's see. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my presentation now. Let me just do one thing. Okay, so on the 12th of March 2020, the government announced the closure of all preschool, schools and higher education institutions in Ireland, which would last then until the 29th of March, but as we know, this has now been extended. And school closure is a non-pharmaceutical measure which is used to mitigate the transmission of viruses. It has been used in many different countries during the H1N1 pandemic in 2009. And school closures, it is an effective way of trying to reduce the spread of viruses, but it may have a number of consequences, economic, social, and educational consequences. And the one that we're going to talk about today is that school closures may actually lead to a widening of inequalities in education and skills. Sorry, one second. Okay. Where were we? One potential consequence of closures is the widening of inequalities in education and skills. With COVID-19, we know that there are socioeconomic inequalities in skills and in education in Ireland. And data from the Growing Up in Ireland study shows that by age 3, there's a 15-point gap in the verbal ability scores of children from the highest socioeconomic backgrounds and children from the lowest socioeconomic backgrounds. And by age 13, this gap actually widens to 30 points. And inequalities in education may be attributed to the family investment model and also the family stress model. The basic idea behind this is that disadvantaged families may face financial constraints, and they may also have lower levels of parental education. And this, coupled with the higher level of stress that families who are living in poverty face, means that these types of families often invest less in their children's education. So for example, they may provide less stimulating learning materials and less stimulating learning experiences to their children. They may also engage in less or in more permissive or more harsh parenting. And we know that schools can reduce the magnitude of the gap in skills, but it doesn't completely eradicate it. So what consequences does this have for COVID-19? Well, as a result of COVID-19, we know that school closures has essentially shifted education from the classroom to the home. And that means that homeschooling is now a reality to close to 1 million children in Ireland who are currently enrolled in primary and secondary schools. Now, we know that schools have made a number of different resources available to families, virtual resources mainly. So, for example, there's information available on the Department of Skills and Education website, on individual school websites. We know that some schools are using educational apps to communicate with their students. Some schools are providing virtual classes to students. We know that a lot of teachers are sending home resources to children in terms of homeworks or exercises. Most schools are engaging with families through text messaging and emails. And then more recently, we had the homeschooling hub in RTE. But we also know that it's likely to be a high level of variability in both the school's capacity, but also parents' capacity to effectively provide and use these resources. And you can imagine that just homeschooling may be more challenging in lower SES households. So for example, there could be a lack of physical resources. If there's overcrowding in the home, there can be lack of desk space, of computers, there could be Wi-Fi issues. We also know that families in lower SES households may face some time constraints, particularly now if they're working in essential services like retail or in healthcare, which many low SES households do actually work in. There may also be literacy issues, so parents may actually struggle to engage in the material that's been sent home by the teachers. And as we all know, due to COVID-19, there's just this heightened sense of stress and there's more health problems. And this may really affect both the parents and children's ability to engage in homeschooling. So on the 6th of April, a Morax market research agency conducted a survey and they allowed us to include some questions on homeschooling. And what this figure here shows is the percentage of time that parents are reporting spending homeschooling their children. And what it shows is that actually the majority of parents are reporting that they're spending between 1 to 2 hours per day homeschooling their children. But what's interesting, which is, as you know, far less than a typical school day, but what's interesting is that there's actually no differences by different levels of parents' education. So for example, 52% of parents who have a college degree or higher report spending 1 to 2 hours per day homeschooling their children, while the figure is 53% for parents who have less than a college education. So we're not seeing any kind of educational inequalities regarding the amount of homeschooling, but where we are seeing some educational inequalities is in the use and availability of educational resources. So what this graph shows here is that the children who are living in households where there's lower levels of parental education, they're being sent less resources by their teachers. They're less likely to be using RTE's homeschooling hub, and they're less likely to be using educational apps such as Edmondo and Aladdin. And these differences are all what we would call statistically significant differences. But where we aren't actually seeing any differences is that there's kind of equal numbers who have virtual classes with their teachers, who are using the school website, using the Department of Education website, and receiving texts and emails from their schools. So while the amount of communication between families and schools seems to be equal for families from different social groups, there does seem to be some differences in the types of materials that parents are receiving from schools according to parents' education. But does it matter? Does it actually matter if children miss a couple of months of school? Well, because the current school closures are unprecedented in terms of their scale and duration, we really don't have any any evidence on the long-term implications of school closures. But there have been a couple of studies that we can draw on for some evidence. So one study was conducted by Heaton, and he studied the impact of school closures due to opposition to court-mandated integration of African-American children and white children in the US in the 1950s, where essentially schools were closed in certain counties for 2 years. And then they followed these children up into adulthood, and they found that the children in the affected counties did not actually experience any poor financial health or criminal outcomes later in life. But the authors kind of argued that this was because the children may have been able to access schools in other areas, and perhaps that's why there was no long-term impact. Another US study was conducted by Goodman, and they studied the unexpected school absences and school closures due to bad weather, so what we call snow days. So while snow days aren't that common here in Ireland, they are pretty common in the US. And what they found was that each individual school absence reduces the children's math scores by 0.05 of a standard deviation. However, total school closures due to snow days actually had no impact on the children's test scores. So they argued that perhaps it's easier for teachers to manage when the whole school shuts down than when individual children miss school. But one of the disadvantages of both these studies is they're looking at the average effect. They didn't actually check whether, say, children from certain social groups were more adversely affected by these school closures. But there was one study which did do that by Lavie. So Lavie investigated the impact of differences in the number of hours of instructional time across different countries using the PISA data. And what they found was a 1 hour increase in instruction in core subjects per week actually increased children's test scores by 0.06 of a standard deviation. And what was important about this study is that it actually showed that the effects were much larger for children from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So essentially, all children who spend longer in school had higher test scores, but these effects were even bigger from children from disadvantaged backgrounds. And this is consistent with what we know about summer drift. So summer drift is when we see this decline in academic skills experienced among lower SES children due to the summer break that we just don't observe among higher SES children. So what these very limited, we don't have much literature, but what these very limited studies tell us or seem to suggest, along with the data that we're finding that perhaps children from lower SES households are receiving less resources from schools, is that lower SES children may be particularly impacted by the current school closures that we're experiencing, unless interventions are put in place to try to mitigate these. So one option will be to adopt this concept of proportionate universalism, right? And that means that all families receive some level of support, because I think all families in Ireland are finding homeschooling challenging at the moment. But the families with a higher level of need should receive more support. And at the end of our talk today, we're going to work through what some of those kind of interventions could look like and whether they're feasible or not. And I think this is a very good time for me to stop and actually hand over to Noel from Tusla, who's going to talk about what types of interventions Tusla and the Department of Education are putting in place. So I'm going to end my presentation here, and I'm going to hand over to Noel, who's going to talk to you, and he's going to share his slides with you now. So Noel, I'm handing over to you.
Okay, thank you, Orla. Okay, this is where you find out whether I'm a technological Luddite or not now as to whether this works or not.
Yeah, Noel, it's working.
Okay, so I think I'm on slideshow at the moment. You can see, okay, so good morning, everyone. And it's great to have so many colleagues from Tusla and TESS and across schools and government departments involved in this conversation this morning. So I'm going to take the opportunity initially just to briefly tell you who we are, because I know most people will be aware, but we did change our name last November to Tusla Education Support Service. Previously, we would have been known as the Educational Welfare Services. We have three strands: the Statutory Education Welfare Service, the Homeschool Community Liaison Scheme, and you'll be hearing from Aoife later, and the School Completion Programme. In our Educational Welfare Service, the statutory, we provide a service to all 3,950 schools in the country, and currently you can see our staffing is 98 education welfare officers, 12 seniors, 5 managers. On an annual basis, we receive roughly 6,500 referrals from schools, and at any one time we're carrying a waiting list of somewhere in the region of 2,500 cases. We screen and prioritise all referrals to ensure that priorities get immediate attention. The Homeschool Community Liaison Scheme has 420 coordinators working across 531 schools. This is part of the DESH scheme, and it's really about building relationships between home and school. The schools involved have a teacher assigned to the post who spends quite a lot of their time visiting homes, and it's really about engaging parents in the school community and their child's life. And homeschool really has come into its own during this crisis. The School Completion Programme, 122 projects working across 690 schools. And this programme targets the students most at risk of early school leaving, or those students who are of school age and have dropped out. It is a funded programme, so programmes are managed locally. And again, we have invested significantly in this programme in the last number of years. Our numbers, just to give you a sense, in an annual, the last school year, we supported 6,100 students through the statutory service. 30,000 parents received support from homeschool, and 26,000 students were targeted by the school completion programme. So we're now living in our new reality, and I suppose it's become a new normal. And my new normal, which has changed our lives and our family, is that there are now 5 big people in the house all day, every day, and we all sit down for dinner every evening, where normally we would have seen each other at most maybe once a week for dinner. We're all struggling to adjust to this, and it really, I suppose, as Orla has mentioned already, education is now dependent on families as we navigate this crisis. And again, we're all very aware that families differ, and the ability of families to adjust is influenced by many factors. Our education system has been designed and has worked over the last 30 years to try and level the playing field. We've had lots of interventions to support those most marginalised students. Unfortunately, these supports are not now available, so family capacity has become the determining factor. Most families will adjust, and as Orla said, all families are finding this tough. But our concern in the test service and in Tusla in general, and I'm sure most of the people on this call today, is for those students whose family is not in a position to support their safety, well-being and continuity of education. And I would contend, while there is no research to back this, that school closures, if they continue for an extended period, are likely to impact further on educational inequalities. So how has this impacted Irish education? Schools were not ready for closure on March the 13th. It came as a surprise to all schools that the closure happened so fast. Very few, if any, schools had contingency plans in place. Now, had schools been given notice, I believe that they would have been better prepared. Schools could have identified students in need of technological support. So this all had to be done post the closure. I think we all hoped initially that the closure would be short and would have minimal impact. And our responses really have had to be adapted as we receive new guidance. I suppose also it's very real for all of us that we're all challenged now to work in areas that may not be our key responsibility, and demarcation is not really acceptable in the current climate. I think in general the response has been really impressive, and particularly across the schools sector, schools and teachers have really been working hard to find workable solutions. I suppose our ability very much varies, and I'm one of the people in this Luddite category. Our ability to use ICT skills and our confidence in using them really has determined how effective teachers have been in this period. And we still have serious uncertainties hanging over us. When will the Leaving Cert happen? Will it happen? And when will schools reopen? So from a policy level, and again, I'm not going to dwell too long on this, but just to talk a little bit about the national policy response, and then maybe to share with you where the Tusla response has been. All government bodies, state bodies and education partners have come together to respond. And I mean, I think this is really important that people have set aside bureaucratic barriers that may have existed previously to try and find quick solutions. And there's evidence of cautious willingness to step outside normal policy and practice approaches. And I'm using the word cautious there because people don't want to make radical decisions that could have long-term impact. So people are trying to stay within boundaries while finding solutions. I think a really good example has been the school meal scheme, where 3 government departments, 2 state agencies, including ourselves, and 1,500 schools have worked out to deliver a rapid solution, have worked together to deliver a rapid solution. As Orla has said, the DES has issued and plans to issue further guidance in relation to continuity of education. And also there is guidance being generated for parents. But all of this guidance has come post-closure. So this guidance wasn't ready before the problem arrived. And I suppose we're all challenged to work in areas that are not our primary responsibility, and schools are no different in this respect. I suppose just from Tusla's point of view, we're the state organisation responsible for child protection and child welfare. And we had to prioritise very quickly for a worst case scenario. And the 3 strands of service that we have to protect, no matter how bad this crisis becomes, is children in care, approximately 6,000 of them, the whole piece around child protection and welfare, and families experiencing domestic violence. We're now also trying to figure out how we can work remotely, and this is very, very challenging because the basis of building relationship with vulnerable people is on face-to-face contact to try and establish working relationships. We have done a lot of scenario planning in Tusla as to how we're going to respond depending on different outcomes. And I believe that a similar approach is now needed in education so that schools and the system can respond to whatever the new reality is, whether it is a rapid opening of schools, whether it is a gradual opening of schools, or whether it is an extended period of closure. From a test point of view, our perspective is that we are also adjusting to our new reality. And I suppose we have really been trying to encourage our teams to be innovative, and we've allowed people to use their innovation and their knowledge to come up with rapid solutions and to use budgets appropriately. The focus has been 100% on the most vulnerable students and families. And also, we have a challenge in our service in that our statutory staff, many of them were on this call, don't have appropriate technology to work from home. So that has proven to be quite challenging. But I think the willingness of individual people to respond has been most impressive. I'm just going to finish with a couple of positive, negatives, and challenges. So I think there's a positive and a negative in IT. We have heard a lot in recent years about the negative impact of students spending too much time on gadgets. Well, if we didn't have gadgets, wouldn't we be in right trouble now? I mean, if this had happened 20 years ago, it would have been a massive struggle. So we have to embrace the technology that's there. And I think we really now need to look at how we can radically integrate IT into how we teach and how we learn in future. I suppose the negatives really relate to the lack of resources, the lack of broadband that some families have access to, and also really the lack of investment in ICT in both primary and post-primary schools. Schools really have had to fundraise and generate the funding to have any kind of an ICT structure. It's amazing how third level has been able to adapt more rapidly because they have a really good, robust ICT structure in place. I think there's also a challenge with inconsistency on how schools are responding. I mean, we're hearing stories of schools that have done amazing stuff. We're hearing stories of schools that are over-pressurizing parents. And we're also hearing stories of schools that are making minimal or no contact with families. Also within schools, there's a lack of a coordinated response. Individual teachers completely vary in how they're engaging with children. I think the most vulnerable group are the ones that I certainly think we need to discuss at the end of this call is children with special educational needs, vulnerable families, and I believe there is a case now for a limited opening of schools as they have done in the UK for particularly vulnerable students. I suppose we're all concerned, and certainly from a test point of view, our key concerns is that this could increase school dropout. There's also a high risk that more students will not complete their state exams. And I suppose the long-term impacts on educational outcomes, again, is something that we'll have to watch in the future. There are likely positive outcomes though, because if we use the crisis as a learning opportunity, we should be ready for such situations in future. And I also think that this could propel reform in the education system that will be positive. So a lot of the resistances that might have been there have had to be set aside because we've had to deal with the new reality. Ultimately, and I believe this firmly is, that we all need to accept that our education system is there to meet the needs of all our students, and we as policymakers and practitioners need to embrace new ways to achieve this. Okay, Orla, that's me.
Okay, Noel, thank you very much. That's really interesting. I think it's one of the most interesting things is that how Tusla and probably lots of organizations are changing how they work and basically making decisions much faster and putting new plans in place much quicker than was ever possible before. So I think that's something that, you know, we're all experiencing as well. And it's great to hear all the work that is being done now in Tusla. So now we're going to hand over to talk to Margaret, who is, as I said, the principal of OLI in Darndale, to talk about, you know, what is it like running a school at the moment? What is it like running a virtual school at the moment? And the challenges that, you know, families are also facing. And Margaret, you're going to share your screen with us now. And I think maybe let's just, if you want to make sure that it's working. So if you want to share your screen, put it into slide view and go through the first 1 or 2 slides, and I can just tell you that it's working before we progress.
Okay, thanks very much, Orla. Hello, everybody. It's great to talk to you today. My name is Margaret. I'm teaching in the junior school in Darndale, Our Lady Immaculate. I'm just going to put on my slide now, slideshow. I'll just be 1 sec while I get that going.
Okay, Margaret, it says end of slideshow.
Yeah, and I'm just not, will I go through the slides maybe? Will I try it again, Orla, maybe?
Yeah, try it one more time. We can
Okay.
see from the beginning, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, so do you just want to go down to your first slide just to make sure it's working?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, that's perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm just going to talk about the impact of the school closure on our school. Obviously, when we got the news that the school was closing on March 13th, we didn't actually think it would be for as long as it has gone on for. But the first part I'd like to talk about is the impact on students. Children are missing the school learning environment and their education is being interrupted. We're an open door school, so we work hard to build relationships within our school community. So this important aspect of school life is no longer there now as we know it. We have to think of new ways to engage our students. We've been using phone calls, emails, and even Easter cards. We have children can access an online learning digital library, and they can teachers can keep in touch through this platform. The teachers can email assignments and can use our school website to make contact with the children too. However, not all homes are the perfect learning environment, as we know, especially if you're living in a hub or a hotel. It's very difficult to create that home learning environment for some children. They can also lack a quiet space and it's very difficult for them to focus. And most importantly, they don't have access to digital resources at home that are needed to engage in online learning. Our special educational needs children are struggling with the absence of routine and also our individualised learning programmes. And I think routine would be something for all of our children that they miss. What I'm hearing from all our families is that the children really miss school. Not all families have access to reading materials, pencils, even crayons, papers and paints. These basic things aren't always there, and resources such as board games and jigsaws may be in short supply. Another aspect, children are missing their friends. This important aspect of social development is missing from their lives, and just trying to find new ways to cope with that and to help them with that. We are hoping that our children will also continue. We have meditation sessions that we've had running at the school, but we're hoping they can continue by uploading some videos to our school website. So that will be something that will be for their own well-being. The school continues to provide a weekly healthy food package in lieu of the child's lunch. This is important as it can ease that pressure on some of the families at this very difficult time. There's a big impact on parents for the current closure of the schools. Our parents are missing the day-to-day contact with the school, which is a key aspect of school life. They're worried about the impact on their child's learning, and we now make contact with our parents through text, phone calls, emails, and we have our own Facebook page and the school website. Most parents are really glad of this support. It's really good for the parent to talk to the class teacher and any concerns or issues they're having. Many parents can struggle with helping their child to learn at home, especially if they have unmet literacy and numeracy needs themselves. The online learning can be very difficult for some parents to access with their child. We're trying hard to work with that with our families by phone calls, phone support, technological support, working in new ways to help our parents to access our online platform and to help the students to gain access. So I think that's an important thing, that we might have to work in a bit of a new way to support our parents, because if we have the digital literacy skills that we can share, well, maybe now is the time to share them too. It's important that parents have access to support for their own mental well-being. The parents at the moment are, you know, it's a really tough time, and well-being is so important at the moment. So we have made sure that they can access supports at PPP parenting programs through the Facebook page, and our homeschool liaison teacher plays a vital role in connecting with parents and ensuring that they have access to all the supports. So making sure that they have what they need is there, and that they can access support in this really difficult time. The school closure has impacted on a big way on our teachers. They have found different ways to connect with their students, including phone calls, emails, and online support. Teachers have tried to be as creative as possible in their teaching, and they've tried to use the child's home learning environment as much as possible. They've learned to adapt quickly and have shown great care for those they teach. The teachers are supporting the parents as much as possible in these difficult times and giving them encouragement in their own abilities. So that's really important, and that there's support there at this difficult time. The school closure has had a big impact on the management of the school. Relationship is a key aspect of school life. It's very hard to see our colleagues on a day-to-day basis to offer support. It's very hard when we don't see them and we can't offer support and guidance. Face-to-face contact is missing, and so we have to find new ways of supporting each other and giving guidance, much needed guidance. And that's just the way it has to be now, but it still has to be there. Staff have been amazing, as I've said, in creativity and flexibility. They've had little or no training, but they've come up and tried to learn new ways of working with the children, especially in an online capacity. It's important that I myself am supporting them and staying connected with my staff through motivation and keeping up morale, because this time we're kind of operating in a vacuum and it's very, very different. It's important to remind teachers that families are under a lot of stress at the moment. Remember that. Don't overburden them with too many website links. Realize that this is a new situation for us all. In some ways, this unprecedented emergency situation has pulled the school community together in some ways. There's a sense that we're all in this together, and that's a unifying experience. Well-being of all members of the school community is important too. Teachers and parents are facing worries such as employment and sickness within their own families. It's vital that the mental health of everyone is considered and supported in these unprecedented times. So finally, I'm just going to come to my last slide, which is the COVID-19 school closure has had a big impact on the school community. All members have had to think of different ways of communicating and connecting with each other. I think it's important to consider the development of digital literacy across the school community. It's important if we're going to ensure the equality of learning is there for all. So, thanks.
Thank you, Margaret. That was really great to hear. What school, or yourself as a principal, and what schools may be facing at the moment and those difficulties. And just to say, like, OLI is an exceptional school. I'm not sure how representative it is of all schools in Ireland. It's a really, really great school. You care a lot for your pupils and go and be above and beyond. And hopefully that is being replicated in other schools around Ireland as well. But what we're going to do now is turn over to Aoife. Aoife is the Homeschool Liaison Coordinator in OLI. And Aoife is now dealing, as she always does, she's dealing with families on an everyday basis, obviously at a distance, but she is experiencing what the families are experiencing and what they're telling her, and how she's had to adapt her practices to work with these families in some very challenging circumstances, as we will be hearing now. So Aoife, if you want to unmute your microphone and share your screen, that would be great.
Hi, Orla. Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen now. 1 second.
Okay, and I'll stay on the line just to tell you that it's working.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
No.
Okay, we can see you, but not the screen.
Yes, I think the screen sharing isn't a possibility just yet. It's been disabled for me.
Oh, okay. Let me look into that.
Sorry, Orla. Thank you.
It's okay. I was gonna make sure you are okay. I think something is. Oh no, not working. Let me see. Aoife, sorry, Aoife. Let me do this now.
Sorry.
Okay, it should work in. Okay, now you should be able to share your screen.
Perfect. Yes, looking good.
Good. As I said, there will be technical difficulties.
Exactly. There's always blips along the way. Now, can you see my screen, Orla?
We can, yes. Yeah.
Perfect. Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Orla, and good morning, everyone. So as Orla mentioned already, my name is Aoife Breen, and I'm the Homeschool Community Liaison Coordinator of Our Lady Immaculate Junior National School. So I work alongside Margaret, the Principal, and Noel, the Chair of the Board of Management there. Now, I started this role in September, so I'm quite new to the role, but before that I was teaching in the school for 6 years. Now, before I explain the work I've been doing since the school closures, I want to briefly outline the role of the homeschool liaison on a normal basis. Now, I know there's plenty of homeschool liaison experts in the audience, so I'll try and give a good brief account and give the role justice. So the key areas of work are shown within the diagram. So in a normal school week, I would spend at least 1/3 of my time doing home visitations. So this may be due to reasons, to arrange a class with a parent, or just simply to create a good relationship with the school and the home. And within my role, I would also organise courses or classes for parents and guardians. So that could be anything from parenting classes to computer classes, flower arranging and cookery. Then parents who may be interested in furthering their own education, I often work with them and we organise the correct pathway they might want to take to achieve this, depending on if it's completing the Leaving Certificate or going on to 3rd level education. As Homeschool Community Liaison Coordinator, I also link in with the other homeschool liaisons in the local area, excuse me, and different agencies throughout the community. Each year, a transition programme takes place in the school, which involves making the transition from preschool to primary school and the transition from the junior school over to the senior school as seamless as possible for the students, parents and staff. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm quite new to the role, so the COVID-19 pandemic really has been a baptism of fire for me. Since the closures of school, I have, like many of us, been working from home, so my daily routine has been changed massively. However, each day, excuse me, I've been making contact with the parents of the school in various ways. So as you can see, I've been using a parents' private Facebook group, and I've been posting something in it each day. So the posts can vary from live yoga classes, online educational games, contact details for support agencies for parents, or login details for the online learning site that Margaret mentioned earlier. And I've seen a real engagement from the parents in this group now more than ever. We also contact families through phone calls or text messages. So particularly the first few weeks, I tried to call every family in the school, and then since then I might call some families every week or every 2nd or 3rd week, depending on how things are within the home. The phone calls can range from a 1-minute call to a 30-minute call, just depending on what's going on in the home at the time. And excuse me, the parents and children are always delighted to hear that the school has reached out. So during these phone calls, I would usually get an insight into how things are for the family. Some families may be finding it more difficult than others, so depending on what they might need, I would make up a pack for that family specific to supporting them. For example, one particular parent was finding it very difficult to do any schoolwork with their child without an argument erupting at home. This child has very specific needs, so after speaking to this parent, I spoke to the class teacher, and together we made a work pack that was tailored for the child, including an individual timetable with more movement breaks, some yoga activities and some baking throughout the day. Another family was finding things very difficult. This particular family are living in a family hub. As Margaret mentioned earlier, it can be quite difficult because the living conditions might be slightly smaller. The parent I mentioned earlier was waiting to be tested for COVID-19, and because of this, neither the parent or children could leave the room. So I gathered plenty of board games, books, Lego and art supplies for the family and dropped to the reception. Now this just helped to keep the kids busy while they had to stay in the room, and then I kept in contact with this parent each day, particularly that week, just to see how things work for her. Other families that I've come across are experiencing financial worries. So if they've lost their job due to COVID-19 and they have financial stress within the house, I usually link them in with St. Vincent de Paul. Then some families may be possibly dealing with mental health issues. They might need more support outside my professional remit, so I will actually link them up to an agency that can provide that support. Now, probably one of the most important programs I've been involved with at this time since the school closures is the school meal.
We'll go on with this anyway. Let me just do that again. Okay, so yesterday a couple of us met to talk about some potential solutions that might be feasible if they're not already being done. So myself, Noel and Margaret are now going to talk about the feasibility of these. So one of the first potential solutions is that we know that the school meals program has been very good in getting back up running recently and sending out food parcels to families who were already recipients of the school meal program. So one potential solution now is to deliver educational materials alongside those food parcels, just to ensure that perhaps the families who may not be able to access online materials, if they don't have enough computers or laptops, they can't get materials virtually, that they could actually get physical educational materials like workbook exercises along with the food parcels. So it'd be interesting, Noel and Margaret, to hear your views on that.
So Orla, I suppose, Noel here, we know that this is already happening in some places. So from the feedback we're getting from our colleagues in school completion and homeschool, we know that some people started this from day one. And I think it is a really good idea. And it seems to have been really well received by children that, you know, when food comes into the household, children see that as being adult stuff. But when something comes in that's exciting or interesting for a child, I think there's a lift for the child. So I think this is a really good idea. And we know that it has worked well where people have already started to use it.
Okay, so it's great that some schools, but it's not been done consistently, I presume.
I assume not. Yeah.
I think it's a really good idea. I think our families would really appreciate that, and I think it's really nice, as you say, Noel, the food is for the adults, but that special thing for them is important. Yeah, and their learning is continuing. Yeah.
Okay. Something else that we talked about yesterday, guided video calls for at-risk children. And again, we know this is happening on an individual basis among some teachers, among some schools, but should it be, I don't want to use the word mandated, that perhaps there should be these teacher-guided video calls for the most at-risk children?
So Orla, maybe I might just come in on that just from the wider Tusla perspective. I mean, one of our concerns at the moment, and people will have seen it in the media recently, is that referrals to child protection and welfare have dropped significantly since this crisis has started. Mm-hmm. And at any one time, approximately 25% of referrals come from schools. So the fact that teachers and principals are not physically seeing kids every day, I think that the ability to be able to have a visual with the child, I think is really important, because children mightn't always necessarily tell their teacher that they're concerned, but teachers know the cues and they know how to read the cues with the child. So if this is possible, I think it would be fantastic. I mean, one of the things I've talked to our IT guys in here is, I mean, really at government level, we've asked for people to make radical changes. I mean, I think there should be a request out to all the telecommunications companies to make free Wi-Fi available, or to make free data roaming available during this current period, to facilitate families who can't afford to pay for credit, or maybe who don't have Wi-Fi in their home.
And do you know if that has happened, if any of the IT or any of the Wi-Fi companies are?
I doubt it, but I don't think the question has been put to them yet, maybe, you know.
Yeah, okay, so that's definitely something that potentially could be done by the department. Margaret, what do you think? Do you think teachers would be able to do this?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's really good guidance and really good guidelines, and it's important to highlight these children with the teachers, and you know, to keep that eye out. That would have been there anyway, but just that we will be able to do that. Yeah.
I think, Orla, just another point to make is that we have a number of departments involved here, in the Department of Children and Youth Affairs. probably are the people who are more acutely aware of the at-risk children, because that's our parent department in Tusla. The Department of Education are looking at the wider educational remit and at teaching and learning in general, while I think our colleagues in the Department of Children are more acutely aware of the more vulnerable children's needs.
Yeah, that's a good point then, to involve DCYA as well. Okay, one of the other things we talked about yesterday was having an established school helpline that would run, that parents could ring in. So we already know, I mean, you guys are Margaret particularly, and Aoife, are getting calls from parents. These calls can come at any time of the day or night. And at the moment, it's really the responsibility, I guess, of the principal to take these calls. So one thing we talked about was having a helpline for parents, that if they do want to talk, that they have someone to that they can speak to, and perhaps this helpline could be rotated among all the teachers in the school. So, Margaret, do you think this is something that might be feasible in your school?
Yeah, I do. I think it's nice that the control go back to the parents then when they need support, that they can actually get the support. Obviously, it's during school hours, so and it's more it's accessible to give support in that way, but also it's within a time frame. So I think that's, yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Okay, so that's something. Sorry, I'm just sharing my screen again. Oh, no, wrong screen. Stop share. I'm just going to share the PowerPoint again. Okay, share. Nope, not working. Okay, so the next, I'll tell you just what's on the next idea we had was special needs assistants. So special needs assistants, as we heard a lot in the news, there's been talk that they may be redeployed in other places, but one idea would be that the special needs assistant to continue working with the children that they are already working with, obviously remotely, but at the moment, you know, is that happening? Are SNAs still working with their families or not?
For our school, not at the moment, but it's something that definitely could be considered. And I think from talking to parents, I think the children would love that routine back again, and that familiar face. And just if they have a boundary day where they know they're going to see online the person who's the adult who's been working with them, then I think it's definitely something that to be considered, and it's a good idea.
And Orla, from our perspective, I mean, and certainly we're getting lots of reports in from families that are really distressed at the moment. I mean, if you have a child with a specific condition, it can be really challenging. And the fact that the children are now cocooned in the house for 24 hours a day is doubly challenging. So I think the idea of families being able to get a break is really important. And I think that stress level has to be addressed. We know that in the UK during this crisis, they have kept schools open for very much for vulnerable children, where they're able to come in on a scheduled basis, adhering to social distancing. I think as an initial step, if all principals decided to assign their SNAs to make contact with families on a daily basis, even just to have a chat with the kid, for the child to be able to talk to somebody that they have a strong relationship with, and also to help families and guide families, I think that would be really. And as Margaret and Aoife both said, families do appreciate these contacts. They really, really appreciate when a school reaches out to them.
Yeah, I think all families at the moment would benefit from perhaps having less time with their children as well, but particularly these families. So, okay, so and that kind of leads us nicely into the next potential solution was, again, as Noel you mentioned, they're doing this in the UK to some extent. So they're opening schools on a very limited basis for the most vulnerable children, maybe obviously not bringing in children every day into school, but perhaps once or twice a week, again, to provide some respite perhaps, but also to make sure that the most vulnerable children are getting some educational support. So is that, obviously this would have to be done within physical distancing guidelines and so on, but Margaret, do you think that's something that could be feasibly done in your school?
I do. I think it has to be like looked into carefully, and obviously and safety. Safety is important. We have to keep that in mind at all times. So, but I think it's definitely something that's definitely, yes, worth considering with safety as an important aspect of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and having public health officials perhaps provide those guidelines to schools about how they would do it.
I think Orla, this probably is a decision that will be made once we know where we're going after the 6th of May. I think we have a 2-week period now when we're sure that everything is closed down, but if schools are going to remain closed for a longer period, I think it's something that must be addressed pretty rapidly, because, you know, if these families have been kind of in this situation for over a month at this stage, we're looking ahead to September. If we're looking that far ahead, it's a period of almost 6 months, which will be unsustainable for families, I think.
Yeah, and as I said in my presentation, there is the issue of summer drift, you know, and usually summer drift. So you see children's test scores. Basically, their academic skills decline when they've missed school for 2-3 months over the summer period. And if we now consider if schools won't be back until September, that is essentially 6 months of missing school, which for some children, you know, if they can be homeschooled properly at home, it's not going to be an issue. But it is the most vulnerable children that we're concerned about. Now, the final, someone
just going back on that point, Orla, I think children with specific learning difficulties, as Margaret has already alluded to, need specific approaches and techniques to help them with their learning. And they do need contact with their teachers and their lesson aides who have those skill sets, because sometimes parents may be really struggling because the child may not be able to engage in what we would consider to be everyday tasks. So there is a need for guidance. And I believe that if those kids could come into school for an agreed period every week, that a plan could be set out then for the following week with the assistance of their class teachers and SNAs.
Okay, that's great. Just the final, sorry, I did unshare the screen there, but just the final thing I have, or solution there, was when we kind of looked at the literature about, you know, what types of interventions are effective for basically homeschooling children. There have been a couple of studies that were done in the US that looked at providing text messages and text message reminders to parents to read to their children more frequently, but also to provide very short tips about the best way to kind of, you know, educate parents. And again, this was specifically for disadvantaged parents that these studies were aimed at. And they kind of text parents 3 times per week over an 8-week period to see if that increased the amount of time that parents were spending reading to their children. And again, this was done in an experimental context, and they found that those interventions were effective, that parents did then spend more time reading to their children, and their children's verbal skills did improve too. So there is some evidence that text message reminders can be effective. Now, you know, and it's pretty cost ineffective. You know, sending a text message or an email doesn't cost much, and also schools already have access to their families' phone numbers, so it is something that could be done. Is this something that you think might be feasible?
I think it's feasible, Orla, but I think we have to look at coordinating the information coming from schools, because I think depending on whether children are primary or post-primary, I think the volume of information coming in is probably overwhelming for some families. And if you send too much information, people just stop looking at it. Yeah. So I think there's a real need for school principals at both primary and post-primary to coordinate information that's coming from the school, and that families know it will come at a certain time every day, and that they know which messages to pay attention to. Because, like, for example, in post-primary, a kid may be working with 7 different teachers, so they could be getting 7 different volumes of information coming at them at different times on different days. So there is a real need to try and reduce the amount of information we're firing at parents, so that they know which pieces to pay attention to.
Okay, well, that's great. Thank you. I think we're probably ready now to we have received some questions during the presentation, so we're now going to work through those questions. And if anyone else in the audience we're going to open the Q&A session, please feel free to type in your question and we'll get to it, hopefully as we can.
Hi, Orla. Aoife's back. Apologies for the technological glitch. I think my internet went down. I'm very sorry about that.
It happens to our Eve.
Oh yeah, it happens to the best of them.
It does. Aoife, do you want to finish your presentation?
Yeah, if that's okay with you, Orla.
Yeah, we have time, and then we can go to the Q&A session.
So when I got cut off, I was talking about the phone calls?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Let me just share my screen. Oh, and I'm unable to do that. Hold on.
Oh, hang on. I think I need to make you, don't worry, I'll do that now. Okay, now you can try.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So yeah, we can now see your presentation.
Perfect. So I mentioned the phone calls. So I don't know if you heard the some of the examples of the phone calls, one particular parent was finding it very difficult to do any schoolwork with their child without an argument interrupting.
Yeah, you heard that from Aoife. Yeah, that was about food parcels.
Food parcels, perfect. Okay, good stuff. Thanks, Noel. So the food parcels, each family are given an allocated time slot for the collection. So we have a food parcel collection once a week, and the measures are in place for the parents to collect in line with the HSE social distancing guidelines. Now, some of our food packages are also delivered for families that may be living far from the school or have found or have fallen ill or are cocooning at the moment. And I've found personally, from the homeschool perspective, I found the food package collection great if you have resources or work for the students as well. So it allows you to give it to the parent face to face rather than posting it. So it ensures that they actually, they received it. Now, over the past few weeks of checking in with families, similar challenges for families have been coming up each time. And I've just listed some of them in the slides. So this unprecedented time seems to be very challenging for parents with children. I know it's mentioned already with special educational needs. And they're finding the children's behaviour quite challenging because the child is not in their usual routine and finds it difficult or can't really understand why they're not in school. So as a school, we've made packs specific to these children's needs, and we've distributed like children's books explaining coronavirus or a child-friendly cartoon that can explain the coronavirus for the children. Other children I found are struggling to homeschool their children while managing their workload, or sometimes depending on the parents' level of education themselves, they could be struggling to homeschool their child. And some families I've been talking to, the older sibling has actually been homeschooling the younger child because of the parents' level of education. Many of the families are also under a lot of financial stress due to maybe they've lost their job due to COVID-19, and they've been reaching out to St. Vincent de Paul for support. While other parents I've noticed are quite concerned about specific children in their families, for example, children doing their leaving cert, or children making their first communion or their confirmation. So during COVID-19, as a homeschool, it's presented many challenges as well. I found it quite difficult to gauge how a child or parent is over the phone because you don't have the gestures, face-to-face, facial expressions, etc. That's why I found the food package collection can be very effective in getting a sense of how a family is when you see the parent face-to-face. Another aspect that I have found sometimes a bit frustrating is how organising supports at the moment can be a much slower process. So on a normal basis, when the school is up and running, I want to link a family up with an agency, prior to COVID-19, I could call to the agency, maybe collect the necessary forms, complete this form with the parent and send it off. However, at the moment, the homeschool community liaison coordinators are relying on the post, which can really slow things down. And I suppose the fast-paced growth of COVID-19 can make it difficult to organise classes and courses for parents in the future. But one aspect which I know has been mentioned already, which I have found most challenging, is supporting parents and children without overwhelming them. Because I think when you want to support children and parents, you want to provide them with as much support as possible. But sometimes if you bombard them with resources and information, we can almost have the opposite effect. So providing the necessary support when needed and welcomed, rather than bombarding or overwhelming them, just maintaining a balance. And then I suppose the final challenge as homeschool liaison during this time is contacting families each day. So when schools are running as normal, the assembly time in the morning or home time when the parents are collecting their children is always great and makes it really easy to chat to parents that may not be as accessible over the phone. But I find the relationship that I may have built
Okay, I think we have lost Aoife's voice or audio again. Aoife, can you hear us? No. Okay, well, I think at this point, sorry about this, Aoife, we've lost your audio. at this point, I think we will move on to, and start working through some of the Q&A sessions that we have had so far come in. So thanks for that. So I'm just going to, if Margaret can come back online, and Noel, and if David, can you make contact with Aoife to see if what are the issues there? Thank you. Okay, now let me just screen, stop this sharing. Okay, so firstly, thank you to all the audience. We have had up to 120 people on this call, so it's great, and 110 of you are still with us, so we really, really appreciate that. And thanks for your questions, and if you have any more questions, please just send them on in. So the first question that we had is actually directed towards Noel, and it's from Dorothy Watson from the ESRI. And she asks, is there a role for online learning in directing resources to disadvantaged children even after the COVID-19 measures have stopped? So Noel, that question is directed to you.
I think that the answer to that question is yes, but it's a conditional yes, because I think, I mean, if you look at a lot of our learning is coming from what's happening in universities at the moment. And I mean, they're using online pretty much all the way now. I mean, lectures are being uploaded on time. But I think in order for that to happen, we have to ensure that people have technology. And at the moment, we don't have accessible broadband right around the country. I think also, if you look recently, we had the debate of some schools that have tried to go maybe completely IT friendly, and we've had to push back in some areas to that. So I think it's a cautious yes. I think it's something we can do, but it will only work if we can ensure that everybody who needs access has access to the appropriate technology. And as Margaret said, that digital learning and digital literacy becomes something that we absolutely cover with all children and families.
Okay, thanks, Noel. Aoife, you're back. I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm very sorry. I don't think I meant to finish that presentation. We're sorry.
It's okay. We've gone on to the Q&A session now just for time reasons, but thank you very much for
this.
Okay, the next question we have is from Matthew Moran from the Irish Secondary School Secondary Level Students Union. And he's a question that's directed at Margaret, although it does concern secondary school students. So perhaps Noel, you might have something to say about it as well. So he's asking that, I'd like to ask what steps should the Department of Education be doing in terms of state exams this year? So as we know, the only information is that they're not going ahead in June, and we've recently heard they're going to be happening in late July or early August. But no clarity has been given, and this is an extremely stressful situation on the students. So the question is, when do you think students will get clarification on the state exams? Anyone have an answer?
I think Noel might be better with that.
I think Noel might be the better.
Well, look, this is a personal experience for me because my youngest child is in that situation at the moment, and she's really down tools over the last couple of weeks to take a break from studying because everybody was working to a deadline. So I can fully understand the stress, and I think it's one of the comments I was going to make that we're all really struggling with, and I know I'm struggling at the moment. We can't look forward because our lives were very much built around what's coming next and what we have planned. We can't plan holidays, we can't plan events at the moment. So we're caught in this vacuum where we're living in the here and now with absolute uncertainty about what's happening in the future. I firmly believe that a decision has to be made one way or the other pretty soon. And I know I heard this morning a former Minister for Education was suggesting that the exams should be just cancelled at this stage. So I think there is a clamour and there's a real need for a definitive decision pretty soon, because if students don't get a decision, it's going to be really hard to keep motivation up. And I mean, regardless of how we run the exams this year, they're not going to be the same as any other year. So it's going to be really difficult. If we defer them too far, then there's no room for people to appeal or to have a resit, which always has to be an option, because I mean, the department did start in the last few years offering the option of resets for kids who had serious life events. We now know with COVID-19, it's a reality that Leaving Cert students are going to have significant life events during the exams whenever they happen. So I think a decision needs to be made fairly soon. And I mean, I think Orla, as an expert, I mean, you would certainly be able to give some guidance. There are ways around this if a decision has to be made that the exams can't happen.
Well, if the exams can't, well, hopefully the exams can happen, but just from the university's perspective, and that's from someone who would be teaching first year students, which we normally start in September, the universities are planning for this. They are planning that, if students at this point will not be, not coming into university, the first year students will not be coming into university at the start of September. But we are putting contingencies in place that they can start later, be that in November or October or even in January. You know, it is feasible for us to rearrange our timetables and rearrange our teaching schedules to be flexible to do that. So from a university's perspective, that's what we're planning for. But again, we have no clarity, just like everyone else. We don't know what will happen. So yeah, I agree. The sooner we can have clarity, the better for everyone, better for the students and better for the universities as well. Okay, so I'll just move on to the next question. And this is directed to all speakers. And it says, is this a time to consider removing the burden of homework on all families? I think we are operating on a massive assumption that the work is of value and not doing it will interfere with long-term educational progress. Are we more concerned about occupying children and providing something for families to do, or feeding a false fear that not working at this time will cause long-term educational damage? So that's a very interesting question. Basically, it's the kind of question, how important is homework? Do children need to do homework? Should we be giving children homework right now?
Okay, well, let me start with that. So, I mean, as a former teacher, I would have serious questions about the usefulness of homework. And I think there is a sense that lots of homework means that teachers are working better and that children are achieving more, which is not necessarily true. I mean, homework really is just meant to reinforce concepts and work already covered. And it's also a way of parents just checking in at where their child is. I mean, when I was teaching, and it's quite a while ago, I really had a problem with homework because homework created tension as soon as the child came into the class. So the child who didn't have their homework done was starting from a negative position where they were assuming they were going to be asked by their teacher for their homework and they didn't have it. So, I mean, I think in a lot of countries, homework is optional. And I mean, I think it's a very good question and it's something we need to have a debate on. I think the quality of what's happening in our schools now is improving all the time. I mean, particularly in primary schools, I mean, the quality of teaching and learning has really improved dramatically in recent years. And I think the technologies and the methodologies are so good. But I mean, I think accidental and incidental learning is really important for children. And I can even see in my house, I've adults in my house who've now learned how to bake. They never would have done that if this hadn't happened. So I think children are accidentally learning things now that maybe they wouldn't have learned if they were busy doing homework and being in school every day. So I think we have to value non-formal learning as well. It's also really important. So I think it's a question I don't want to give a definitive answer on, but I think it's a really interesting question to debate.
Okay, and how about Margaret or Aoife, do you have any views on homework?
Yeah, I think I agree with Noel there. I think it's something that could be debated. It's amazing the creativity that's been around the work. I said that of using the home environment and trying to be more creative in the home and how many squares in the front room, how many trying to think outside the box a bit with regard to homework, that it's problem solving skills, things like that. I think as I would agree with Noel that there's room for that debate, definitely. Yeah.
Okay. Aoife? Homework?
Yes, sorry, I got cut off there. But I think there is an importance. There's like, homework is very important because it can help a parent see the progress of their child. So like on a day-to-day in normal school times, if they're doing homework at home for the 10 minutes, 20 minutes, depending on the child's age, like there'll be times when I'm in the class and the parent will come in and say, oh my God, that child can read the book. So it's a good way of communicating the progress rather than having a formal parent-teacher meeting with the parent. But I think at the moment, because stress levels can be high in a lot of homes, that maybe, like Margaret said, being creative, it doesn't necessarily have to be formal maths lessons or formal English activity, the likes of baking and reading the recipe or measuring out how much flour they need while they're baking, and the PE lessons online, that kind of thing, just being creative and not stressing anyone in the house out too much or being bogged down by how much work they get done.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
Okay.
another key point here is that if schools try to continue to teach the curriculum, I think there's a real problem because parents are not teachers and shouldn't be expected to be teachers. So I think if schools are closed for a long period, the only classes that obviously need to progress through the curriculum are the Leaving Cert class because they have to sit an exam. I think in reality, the new learning for all the other kids has to be suspended until they come back to school. So it's about reinforcing and upskilling and improving literacy skills, numeracy skills, which can be done on an everyday basis.
Yeah, it's like giving children the basic skills that they need, you know, the fundamental skills, and then that will give them the skills to be able to learn new material when they start back in September, if that happens.
Yes.
Okay, now we only have 5 minutes left, so I'm obviously not going to get through all questions, but hopefully we get through a couple more. So Judy had a number of questions, so I'm just going to pick one of them, and one of them is are there any examples of best practice to link with immigrant parents at the moment? Is there any work being done specifically with immigrant parents?
And I think that's an interesting question, and I mean I think we'd have to reach out to schools, because I've heard of examples of schools where they've made really good links with immigrant parents, and it's a space that we plan to get into now in the next couple of weeks, to look at all the children who are living in direct provision, just to see if they're connected with schools. I mean, language is a massive problem, so for families new to Ireland, if they don't have English as first language, the whole area of EAL is probably posing great difficulties at the moment. So I can't give any examples at the moment, but I think it's something we should put out to the system, and I'm sure we will get. For example, I know in the information that's coming out from the department next week, they're sharing really good examples from schools around the country. So I think we need to ask the specific question, Judy, so that we can get the answer.
Yeah. Okay, now there's a question from Susie, and it's directed towards me. So it's about my presentation on homeschooling, and it says, you know, I showed it that there was one parent on average are spending 1 to 2 hours on homeschooling, and the question was, you know, what do in terms of homeschooling, do we know how parents define this? What do parents consider to be a lesson? Do the parents describe, and what do the parents describe as barriers to increasing homeschooling beyond the average of 2 hours per day? It would be useful to see a breakdown of time spent homeschooling by the age of the child. I think this is absolutely valid point. Unfortunately, within this AMORIC survey, we were only able to put in a very general question: how much time are you spending homeschooling? We didn't define what homeschooling was, so it was however parents interpreted homeschooling. So that was a very limited survey, but in other work that I'm doing with colleagues at the Geary Institute, we are designing a more in-depth survey. That's a time use survey. So if we're using the data from the time use survey, we'll actually be capturing exactly what parents and people more generally are doing. So hopefully once we get that data, we'll be able to really drill down to see exactly what parents are doing with children when it comes to homeschooling. So yeah, keep that data. We'll have it, and we can look at that then. Okay, so I'll just move on to a new question now from Bernie. And it's a question directed to Noel. So Noel talked about the need for coordination within schools so as not to overwhelm parents. Some families are also receiving support from other community family support services. How can we ensure that all supports are being coordinated? I think it's a really good question, Bernie.
And I mean, ultimately, I think the challenge back to schools is to the school principal, and maybe Margaret could comment on this, because I think we need to not overwhelm. And I mean, there's a risk that multiple services are helping the same families now. And I think with the community coordination efforts that are happening, I think there's a chance of sorting it there. So I think ultimately, I think school principals can play a key role here in trying to contain that and try to make sure, and again, with linking with school completion and home schools, to make sure that the appropriate service is linking with the family. Because we all really want to do good, and everybody is trying to do their best. So we're tripping over each other in some cases, trying to help families. Maybe, unless Margaret would like to comment on that.
Yeah, I think there's great intentions behind everything, but I think, yeah, it has to be a coordinated approach, definitely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd agree with you there, Noel. Yeah.
Okay, so we have one more question from Susan, and she says, "Hi Orla, I'm an SNA in a deaf school, and I was appalled at the decision to redeploy SNAs as opposed to using us as recommended by Noel from Tusla. Our experience is education. Whose decision was this?" I guess it was, that's a good question. Noel, do you know whose decision it was to redeploy?
I think just on redeployment, and I know from our experience within Tusla, I mean, some of my colleagues on our team have offered and volunteered to be redeployed to support residential services. So I think the whole disability sector in the HSE, I think, is under terrible pressure. And I think the call went out to see if there are people available. So I think that the basis for it, again, was good intentions. But I think the caller or the person who submitted that question is right. I think we should look after the key role within schools, and linking with the people who already are being worked with would be a good starting point. And to be honest, I would think that principals should just make the decision and get on with it. I mean, sometimes we wait for permission. I think it's better just make the right decision and worry about the consequences afterwards.
Yeah. Okay, now actually our time is up, and I don't want to take anyone else more time because people have other meetings to go to and things like that. And I'm really, really sorry that we couldn't get to. There's lots of more questions that have to be, there's at least 10 more questions there that we have. So it just shows the level of interest in this topic and also how important it is. And if there is sufficient interest, we can organise another session for perhaps in 2 weeks' time if there's interest there, and we can get to those questions then. So normally at the end of a session like this, we would clap and applaud everyone. We can't do that. So, but I would just like to thank all our speakers, Margaret, Aoife, and Noel, for giving us the time today, because we know that they're incredibly busy in adapting to this new situation that we're all in. I'd also like to thank all the audience members. As I said, we had about 120 people sign into this, which is way more than we expected. So, and you all stayed the course. I apologize for the technical difficulties that we had, but this is just the new nature of things that we have to deal with now, and we'll get better at it over time. So just to conclude, I'd just like to say that this session has been recorded. It will be made available on publicpolicy.ie over the next couple of days, so you can listen back if you want. And yeah, thank you everyone. I think